Statistics and data are at the heart of the fight against COVID-19. They were used to justify England's second lockdown, and they'll probably guide us when it's lifted as well. We can talk now to the government's most senior advisor on statistics, Ian Diamond. Thank you very much for being on the programme this morning. So I want to start with the question that everyone wants to know the answer to. How prevalent is coronavirus in the UK right now? And are there any signs that the speed at which it's spreading is beginning to slow?
Well, the good news, let's start with the good news. The good news is, yes, we are seeing a slowdown in the rate of growth. That means we're still increasing, and we are now in England at around about 1.25 per thousand. That means that 1 in 85 people in England, we believe, have the virus. In Wales, a little less at 1 in 100, Scotland 1 in 135, Northern Ireland 1 in 105. So yes, we are continuing to increase the rate. We're increasing the numbers, but the rate of growth is slowing.
Can you give us any detail on who it is who is most likely to have coronavirus and whereabouts they might be?
Yes, well, in England, we have huge regional variation. We have seen in the northwest, northeast, and in Yorkshire steady increases, although they have tended to flatten off in recent weeks a little. We've now seen increases in the last week in the East Midlands, the West Midlands, and the Southeast, and rates are lower, although slightly increasing in the rest of the country. And then where has that been happening? Well, amongst younger people, those in their teenagers and early adults, was where this wave started. It's now moved into all age groups, although again, to finish with some good news, the good news is that amongst those teenagers and younger adults, we are seeing some reductions at the moment.
It really is so refreshing to hear that at least there is a bit of good news. It feels like there's been so many interviews over the last 9 months where all we've had is the kind of gloomiest statistics possible. Given the fact that, although, as you say, it's still spreading, the rate is slowing slightly, do you think we are on track to leave the lockdown in England on the 2nd of December?
Oh, Sophie, that's the $64,000 question, and I would love to give you an answer. We moved into this new period of restrictions just a short while ago. What you'd expect to see in the initial period of restrictions is a continued increase, very simply because these are infections that people would have caught before the restrictions started. We will be working tirelessly over the next couple of weeks to monitor how the restrictions are working in impacting on the pandemic, and we have towards the end of the restrictions to provide all the very best data we can to the government to help ministers with what will clearly be a very difficult decision.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because some of the statistics suggest that the virus was already slowing before we went into the lockdown. You know, the R number, for example, which measures how many people each infected person passes the virus to, it's been falling since the middle of October. We know that it's 1 to 1.2 now, but of course there's a lag. It measures what was happening a couple of weeks ago. So if the rate was already falling, did we need to lock down at all?
Well, I think we need to recognise that that the R number, which has, let's be clear, a degree of uncertainty around it. In any time, we look at one number, but there's always a lower and an upper limit, remains above 1. When it remains above 1, it means that we are continuing to increase. And let's be also clear, in different parts of the country, that the rates were pretty high already. So if they're pretty high already and they're still continuing to increase, albeit at a lower level, they're getting bigger. So I don't think there was too much debate that the government had a difficult but made the right call.
OK. Now, throughout the pandemic, we've become so used to these press conferences where the government shows us very detailed slides of data. But there's been some criticism about the data that they show, that it's quite hard to unpick. Have you been concerned at all that the government's been effectively self-selecting the data that it shows us to back up their arguments?
No, I couldn't support that, Sophie, I'd have to say. During the first wave, some of my colleagues were embedded into the heart of government to make sure that the quality of the presentations that were made to the public were at the highest level. I think that's incredibly important. My experience and my conversations throughout this pandemic with government has been a real wish right across government for openness and for transparency. We at the Office for National Statistics do everything we can to support that. And some of my colleagues will now be going back into the heart of government, really to work on making sure that the communication of statistics, the graphs you may see, are at the highest possible level.
You said there that you were quite confident with the first wave, but that your colleagues were only just going back in. Have you had any concerns about the way that data's been presented during the second wave then?
We at the ONS have been really working tirelessly to make sure that openness and transparency is at the heart of what we do. We have a real policy at ONS that we only talk about data which are in the public domain, and I know that commitment to openness and transparency goes right across government.
OK, the UK Statistics Authority, which you head, said earlier this month the use of data has not consistently been supported by transparent information being provided in a timely manner. As a result, there is a potential to confuse the public and undermine confidence in the statistics. Can you explain what some of those concerns are?
Sophia, I hate to get involved in a technical point, but I think you're referring to some work by the regulator, the Office for Statistics Regulation, which was with the chair of the UK Statistics Authority, Sir David Norgrove. I am the national statistician. We believe it's really incredibly important that the regulator is independent, and the work you're quoting is from the independent regulator.
OK, one of the areas where the government hasn't been completely transparent, shall we say, is over compliance. It's been quite hard to get any information on how many people are following the rules, which clearly, is absolutely critical in the fight against COVID-19. Do you have any data on compliance?
That's a really, really good question, and an important one, if I may say so, Sophie. And yes, we run a weekly opinions and lifestyle survey, which talks about things like, are you wearing face masks? It talks about social isolation, or indeed, are you meeting with other families? And what we find, particularly in those tier 3 areas, was a really high degree of compliance with the regulations and the restrictions that were imposed in those areas. We find a very, very high proportion of people wearing face masks. Now, that not to say that everybody is, and I think one of the things I would say is it is incredibly important. I might say to you, 95% of people are reporting wearing face masks, and that is a big statistic. That's the statistic we have. But at the same time, that still says that 5% are not, and the 5% of a very big number like the population of England is still a reasonably big number. So we need to be absolutely tireless in promoting the restrictions. But the very good news here is that from the data that we have on adherence there, then people are really adhering to the restrictions. I would have to say that we have less information on proportions of people self-isolating, and that's work that we will be trying to improve our data on in the short bit of time.
Really interesting stuff, as you say, an important part of the battle against COVID. I'm keen to talk to you just before we end about the economy. The ONS, of course, measures economic growth. We've seen some quite encouraging figures more recently, but of course we're now in a lockdown. How concerned are you about the economic recovery?
Well, we've all got to be concerned about the economic recovery. And let me start by saying that the long-term future of the economy is inextricably linked with getting on top of the pandemic. I think that's the key thing. But yes, we have seen 3 months of growth in our GDP. But again, it's been mixed. It wouldn't be a surprise to you if I said, well, look, where we've seen growth in the economy has been in places like couriers and computer repair, in retail, driven, of course, by online, but at the same time, really still major slowdowns relative to February in transport, in tourism, and in the creative industries, one of the jewels in our crown, which are down 61% on their their place in February. So the position on the economy, I would have to say, is mixed. Yes, we have had some growth, but it is in different sectors. And I would have to say that we have around 700,000 people less on the payroll now than we did on the payroll, on payrolls now than we did in February. But at the same time, there have been our reading of the number of vacancies is that they did increase, although in the most recent period they have plateaued a little bit. So it's a very mixed story on the economy, but key to getting the economy back flowing is getting on top of the pandemic.
OK, Sir Ian Diamond, always really good to talk, and thank you so much for coming on the programme this morning.
Always good to see you, Sophie.